The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Welcome to Bronxtalk. He has been our most frequent guest over the past 21 years, and he just happens to be the borough president of the Bronx. Ruben Diaz Jr. delivered his 7th State of the Borough address last week, touting rebounding unemployment numbers, development, and an improved approach to healthcare. His proposals included upgrades at Orchard Beach and the building of a platform over the rail yards at Bedford Park. We're going to ask him about all that and more tonight. Because he takes phone calls on his monthly News 12 show in order to maximize our time with him, we do not duplicate that service on this show, but if you'd like to ask questions or make comments, then you email them to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org or put them on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program, or as necessary, we will forward them to the borough president and help you get a response. For the here and now, welcome back to Bronxtalk, the 13th, right? The 13th borough president?
I am the 13th.
13th president of the Bronx.
But more importantly, 2 weeks ago, I think it was the 20th anniversary of my first time on your show.
I remember you posted it on Facebook, and I responded.
So February 15th, 1996, I ran in a special election. I lost that race, but the week before that, you were interviewing the different candidates. I was one of them, first time on Bronx Talk, and so it's good to be here 20 years later.
Yes, that was one of 51 debates that we've done since that time. So anyway, let's get plenty to talk about, right. Never enough time. I think I've had you on here for the previous, right after the previous 6 State of the Borough addresses, so I was trying to find a different way to get started. So I thought I'd try this. If you were a reporter or reviewer, what would you write about Ruben Diaz's 7th State of the Borough address?
Well, I would write that there was a good summary of the last 6 years about what has transpired in the Bronx. The fact that over 23,000 units of housing, most of it low income and moderate income for people of the Bronx, 68 million square feet of retail and development. In the last year, 2015, we saw 2,300 of those units being built and materialized here. $2 billion of development. The fact that there are so many great things happening, and that the State of the Borough also had a lot of good things in there with regards to many of the issues that are being discussed citywide that are really of interest and concern of the people of the Bronx, and how I offered some solutions to so many of those issues.
Would you offer a critique of any sort?
I did. And I mean, you know, that's what we're here for. We're here to try to solve problems. In order for one to do that, you have to identify the problem. You have to applaud when there's great things that are happening in that area. But when you, for instance, I spoke about Legionnaires, and the fact that the city could have responded better, and they failed us during that outbreak. I spoke about how high school graduates, public high school graduates, are being stuck with the bill and more debt because they're not prepared for college, and therefore they have to take remedial classes. I spoke of how we could expand the universal pre-K in our NYCHA developments, the community centers that so many are being underutilized. We spoke of how to deal with the homelessness issue, and how in the city of New York, every single night of the 60,000 people in the homeless shelter, a third of those have a job. And so how is it that we should dedicate, I offered the fact that we should dedicate a good portion of the tens of thousands of new housing units to those individuals who have jobs, who are, for instance, link recipients. So there was a lot in the speech.
I want to pursue this idea of the city. Now, I was there and I went through it afterwards. You criticized the city for lack of affordable housing, for their approach to homelessness. You've mentioned now Legionnaire's disease, college readiness, the zoning proposals. safe to say you're not happy with what's coming out of City Hall right now? I mean, that's a pretty solid list that expands through much of life in the Bronx.
No, I'm being fair. Look, when you look at the increase of the minimum wage, the living wage, when you look at pay sick leave, universal pre-K, there are things that I support the mayor and the city. I conceptually support having 200,000 units of new housing in the city of New York. But at the same time, whenever I think that we can do things better, or whenever I believe that there's a rush and you're cutting community involvement out of the process like it's being done with the text amendments, then I'm also going to speak out as I've always done.
I guess usually when we get together on this program, I leave the political questions, the political future questions for the end, but we're certainly suggesting it here at the beginning. At the same time, you credited Governor Cuomo, maybe intentionally or unintentionally wading into this issue between Governor Cuomo and the mayor. Just your thoughts about Mayor de Blasio at this point? I mean, certainly the rumors are out there that you're interested in running for mayor, potentially against him.
That's not what the speech is about. The speech is about, and going back to your initial question, if I was a reporter, I would want reporters and I want people to sort of focus on the fact that we are moving forward in the Bronx, that we have experienced a lot of progress, and there's more to come. I have credited, again, Mayor de Blasio, but you can't deny the assistance that the Bronx has received from Governor Cuomo, whether it's having his state housing agency pumping millions of dollars into the 23,000 units over the last 6 years, bringing in the Bronx Task Force, where a group of individuals and experts from the Department of Labor are working with the Bronx Overall Economic Development Corporation to cut unemployment by more than half. Whether it's giving us the financing and supporting the 4 Metro North stations that are so desperately needed and can transform not only the Bronx but the city and the entire region on the eastern corridor of the Bronx, giving the assistance to our markets in Hunts Point. I mean, the governor has really been good to the borough of the Bronx.
Let's talk about the job growth. You touted job growth, 100,000 more people working, I think you said, during your term as borough president. Unemployment is now under 7%. Many people are concerned that the jobs that they're getting, especially with the number of new malls we have, the 2 in Broadway, there's one in Co-op City. I mean, you know where they are better than I do. What are the jobs really that are accounting for that job growth, and are they the kind of jobs that would help people build families?
Yes. Look, if you look at what the Federal Reserve has put out, I want people to challenge me on these statistics.
Here I am.
Right. So, and not just in what I say, but go and do your research. When you look at retail, we've done a great job in retail, but that's not the biggest job, the area with the largest job creation. We have the healthcare industry, we have the food industry in the Bronx. We have so many different areas, including, for instance, what we've done around tech. Working with Doran Jones and Perscola with that partnership.
A story in the Times on it just this morning, as a matter of fact.
Well, there's a story on how we're getting more and more of our students to be able to look at coding and look at tech in a different way. We want them to be more than just consumers. We want them to be the creators of the apps and some of the things that we do with our smartphones, with our iPads and so on and so forth. But going back to Doran Jones and Perscola,
yes.
150 people right now, the majority of them are Bronxites. What they're doing is that they're testing software material for the financial industry. The minimum salary there is $45,000 to $46,000 a year. Not only are those 150 jobs that normally go to other parts of the world, they get outsourced. They're here in New York City, they're here in the Bronx, and the overwhelming majority of the people who have obtained those jobs are Bronxites. So we're doing a lot around tech, we're doing a lot around film. Silver Cup Studios, the 35.
Although that's for the future, that's not,
well,
that wouldn't be reflected in the current numbers.
It would not, but what I'm saying is that we're preparing ourselves for diversity in that economy. Mm-hmm. And so we're doing a lot around retail. People want a more pleasurable shopping experience. The new mall in Bay Plaza at Co-op City has given us 1,900 jobs. Remember that many of those jobs are supervisors as well and managers. But we are doing more than just retail. We are doing construction jobs. We're doing jobs in the healthcare industry, in tourism, in the food industry. I mean, Epicureans are coming from all over the globe here. Tourism is up 14%. So is life perfect? No. But we have seen more people working today in the Bronx than any time in the history of recording unemployment or job rates.
Maybe one of the imperfections, if you look at stores like Zaro's, the original Zaro's closed in Parkchester, Kornblau's Hardware closed because of the mall on Broadway, Freilich Jewelers was forced out by his landlord over in Bainbridge Avenue. These kinds of things are happening. Should the balance sheet evaluating Bronx development include those losses? And what is the palatable effect on the Bronx community of losing long-time, much-beloved businesses like those?
So first of all, yes, when we talk about people actively working, we do take into account those jobs that perhaps are not here anymore. To go to the latter part of your question, we should take into consideration those mom and pop and institutions that have been here for a while. So I believe that moving forward, one of the things that we should look at as a city is how do we incentivize property owners? How do we give them the same types of subsidies in order to keep rents low from some of these businesses, in the same way that we do with housing and residential, in the same way that we do with bigger companies. It's a conversation that needs to happen. For instance, when you look at Zaro's Bakery in Parkchester, they were not even given the opportunity to counteract on the rent.
The landlord just raised the rent.
Raised the rent and gave it to somebody else. So whether no one wants to pay more rent, but Zaro's would probably have been able to match it. In that case, they weren't even given the opportunity. We all love Zaro's. We all grew up on Zaro's, and it's unfortunate that's happened. But now remember, as government, it's very tough for us to tell a private property owner what it is they can and cannot do with their property unless we work with them and incentivize them in order to work with government and the community.
So that weighs into the dialogue about government subsidies, and we don't need at this moment to evaluate the many. I mean, people complain about the Fresh Direct subsidy and many other subsidies. What, if I'm understanding you, you're saying why not subsidize small businesses that get into those situations, or maybe even deal with legislation that would give a graduated increase so a landlord could not literally throw somebody out?
It's certainly worthy in having the debate and looking into in the future.
We hear the word gentrification thrown around the Bronx a lot these days. I know you hear it all the time. In your last appearance here, you said you think about it every day. The Armory in Kingsbridge, the community that's now being built in Port Morris, the Jerome Avenue study. Is displacement and even ultimate gentrification inevitable if you try to improve the Bronx or develop the Bronx? Or can we develop the Bronx and keep everyone in place?
Well, in the ideal world, we wish we could keep everyone in place. I am against gentrification. I've done everything that I can, especially in our last 6 years in our more than 14 rezonings, to make sure that we don't have people displaced, that we don't have businesses displaced. That's the reason when you look at our rezonings, they're strategic, where we're not taking people's property away, as you've seen in other parts of the city. You haven't seen eminent domain the way you've seen in other boroughs. What we want to make sure, however, is that we get the enhancements, that we get the amenities that we've been wanting for so long. We deserve that. We deserve a more pleasurable shopping experience. We deserve better stores and nice restaurants and new housing. We need to do it in a way where we do it neighborhood by neighborhood. We've had and taken the neighborhood by neighborhood approach. In some areas, we have to continue to do more with low income housing and for people who are struggling financially. But there are parts of the borough that we can also develop in order for us to retain our professional class, where, again, a young couple who has graduated from college, who are ready to start in their careers, are making too much to be able to apply and to be able to qualify for those low income rates, and don't make enough money to buy a home in Riverdale or Pelham Bay. So there has to be this balance, and that's the reason why when you look at, Gary, at the city's text amendment, I think that unfortunately in the rush to create 200,000 units of housing, the city continues to try to paint the entire city in one broad stroke, And it's not allowing for us to have that autonomy as boroughs and as communities to be able to do the neighborhood by neighborhood approach and see what fits in some areas and what fits in other areas.
It would be nice to look at people who are making, or their income is on the lower end, and find a way to help them not be on the lower end so that they could themselves afford better.
And that's the reason why we're creating jobs. That's the reason why we're teaching our kids coding. That's the reason why we're increasing tourism. These are often, that's the reason why we fight to increase the state's minimum wage to $15 an hour. It's the reason why we were the ones who spearheaded the living wage law in the city of New York. So it's not just jobs, it's the types of jobs and how people can afford to stay here. Look, we are going to change the Bronx and we're making it better. What I want more than anything else is to make sure that Bronxites are here to benefit from that. Whether it's the fact that they can stay here, they can live here, or get more money, or improve their health as well.
And enjoy living here, I'll add that as well, because you're not going to get young professionals if they don't perceive the neighborhood as being a place where they can kind of recreate, et cetera. Mr. Borough President, I know that you were particularly upset about the beating of a Muslim man in the Parkchester section of the Bronx. Is it correct to say that the rhetoric coming from the Republican candidates, in particular Donald Trump, is fueling this sort of activity? I just noticed, I saw that the Southern Poverty Law Center actually labeled the Republican Party a hate group. Your thoughts?
What we hear from the Republican Party, whether it's against certain religious groups, whether it's against the LGBT community, it's totally disgusting. And it's not who we are as Bronxites. It's not who we are as New Yorkers. We are here to try to make sure that everyone feels like this is their home. And it doesn't help. It certainly doesn't help. But what happened in Parkchester, we spoke out against it. We're going to continue to do so. When you look at that area, especially with the Bangladeshi community and the Muslim community, when you look at the West Africans who have moved into parts of the central Bronx, who are mostly Muslim, when you look at the Albanian community, many of them are Muslim, the reason why we've come a long way, the reason why we're so much better is because of the hard work, the faith, and how they're family-oriented in many of these communities. And we appreciate the Muslim faith, we appreciate the Muslim community, and whether you're a Republican candidate nationally, or someone locally who is a parent or an uncle, or a family member who spews hate, and you're brainwashing our youth into doing these horrific hate crimes, shame on you, and there's no room for that here in the Bronx or in the city of New York.
So I'm going to raise a question that I think we discussed last time or the time before that you were here. When you cross into the Bronx from Queens, welcoming you into the borough is the Trump Ferry Point Golf Course with his name displayed there. Wouldn't it make an immense statement if you started a serious campaign to take his name off that golf course? You could probably, and right now in time, you'd be the most famous Democrat in the country.
Well, that would, and I'm sure that there are many folks who've tried this. But when you look at the city of New York, when even the mayor himself said, based on the contract that you signed with the city of New York, you look at that, and there weren't, his political views or whether or not, what he says is idiotic. It doesn't violate the actual contract. And unless you violate the actual terms of the contract, you cannot break it. And we know a lot of people, a lot of developers, a lot of property owners who have the same views as Donald Trump, and in some cases even worse. And we have to be careful based on the contracts that they have, based on the services they provide, whether or not we want to start going after each and every single one of those individuals.
I don't know what, certainly I haven't read the contract.
From my end, I just want to say this, from my end, the golf course in and of itself is a beautiful golf course, and I have not been there since Trump said these.
I'm wondering if we could simply take his name off. I don't like, personally, and this is an editorial, I don't like the idea. I mean, is there a contract that says he has to have a sign in front, or is there a contract that says when you go to Ferry Point Golf Course on the web that you have Donald Trump swinging
if that's the case, there are many streets and many buildings that we named after individuals that in their life they were slave owners. So do we then now want to go
Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah, well,
Start there.
do we then want to go line by line and start scrutinizing? And do we ask every businessman and woman what their political views are? And if we disagree with them, do we not give them, contracts?
Different topic, the idea of covering over the rail yards at Bedford Park. This payment, at least if I recall correctly, this is what Shelley Silver used as a kind of a vehicle to throw the West Side Stadium out of Manhattan because he said it was going to cost $350 or $400 million to cover it over. Well, how are you going to find the money, before we even talk about what could be there, how are you going to find the money to do that, to put up that kind of platform over the rail yards?
Well, first of all, if you look at what has happened in the West Side with companies like Brookfield and the new technology that they've been using, they've been able to put slabs over the Hudson rail yard in a cheaper way and in a faster way. So the technology is changing where it's becoming cost effective and you could do it even faster. In the studies that we had, we started last year in my State of the Borough last year, we said that we would look at 3 rail yard sites. So we saw that this one here across the street from Lehman College is the one with the most potential. The study shows that with about $300, $400 million we can get this done if we work with private entities, if we work with the state, the city, and the federal government. Not only do I think that we can get this financed, but it would be a good rate of return on our investment. Remember that this is not a new idea. Remember that back in the 60s, this is where they wanted to do Bronx Community College. And they wanted to expand there. And then the city's economy went south in the 70s, and
they still couldn't pay for the platform. That was the question.
But I think when you look at our study, 2 million square feet of retail, of housing, commercial, probably the expansion of Lehman College, more green spaces there and community spaces for the community, the amount of jobs that we could create. I think that when you look at $300-400 million and you take into consideration the billions of dollars of development that we can do there and the job creation, it would be a good rate of return on our investment. And look, at least we have to start the conversation.
Your former colleague in the Assembly, Jeff Dinowitz, wants to take the Lehman College parking lot, move that potentially to that spot, and then you could turn, which I certainly would be for, the whole Jerome Park Reservoir into a pastoral area of recreation. You would vote yes, I hope.
Well, Jeff Dinowitz is a great friend, and he's proven tremendous leadership. He, like many other elected officials in the Bronx, my colleagues in government, have wonderful ideas, and that's what we want. I think that when you look at the state of the borough, when you look at our reports, it at least begins the conversation, the dialogue of how we plan for this borough and this city for 20, 30, 40, 50 years moving forward. And certainly we welcome all ideas.
What specifically do you want to do at Orchard Beach?
We want to make it to the economic engine. We want to make it to a great beach that it used to be, and it still is, right? So we call it the Bronx Riviera. Unfortunately, though, it needs a lot of work. And one of the things that we could do almost immediately is to transform that pavilion. The pavilion, because of the salt air and poor engineering when it first went up, is deteriorated the infrastructure, the structure of the building.
It looks like it's being held together by masking tape and cloth. I have to tell you.
And even with that said, Gary, over 1.5 million people visited Orchard Beach last year. We've done our fireworks, our annual fireworks show, salsa. We do so many things there. And what I have done in my State of the Borough and in this budget cycle, I've said I'm going to put $10 million as a down payment. That will cover about 25% of the cost for a new pavilion. And I've challenged my colleagues in government in different delegations, including the governor, to try to match me. And I have to tell you, the response has been, 6 months ago, we just thought that this would have been pie in the sky, but the response is incredible. And hopefully, after everyone is done their budgeting this year, we would get at least the financing for the new pavilion so we can create jobs, have spaces for top-notch events, a restaurant. Could you imagine a nice restaurant?
A nice restaurant on the beach?
Usage all year-round usage.
I was going to say, let's dream for a minute. So you have a pavilion, you have all different kind of acts. Certainly we'd all want to see Bronx-sourced acts, but then you could put a restaurant and make a lovely waterfront that people would come from other places. There's plenty of parking there.
Absolutely. And what I would love to see is for you and your wife to go there on a date in a restaurant in the middle of February.
That would be nice.
That would be nice, right? So.
A little more difficult question. You said in your speech that NIMBYism must give way to compassion. That's a pretty hard sell to Bronx communities, the Northeast Bronx, Highbridge, who are all fighting over saturation of facilities. What's your thought on that?
Look, my thought is that the vitriol, the rhetoric, and the aspersions that we cast on the homeless population, it needs to stop. And you can't have it both ways. One way, on one hand, you have people who say, what is the city doing to address this issue? Why do we see people sleeping in the streets? What is going on? Things are going back to the way they used to be. Then on the other hand, while we profess to be our brother and sister's keeper and we want to do the best for the most vulnerable, the moment that something is proposed in our community boards, the moment that we have a supportive housing unit or a shelter proposed in somewhere in our community, we say, no, we don't want them here.
But some communities are overburdened. You would certainly agree with that.
Absolutely, and there has to be equity here. You have many communities who say, we don't want it here because we are already oversaturated. And then you have other communities that say, we don't want to hear because we don't have anything and we don't want to start. So not only do we have to solve that problem of equity in terms of distribution in our borough, but then we also have to do that citywide. When you look at the fact that the Bronx has the citywide intake center, we're doing more than our fair share. We have over 120 homeless shelter sites in the Bronx. We're doing more than our fair share. So I would ask, and by the way, on a nightly basis of those 60,000 people, the overwhelming majority are Black and Latinos. 40% of them are children. And so many people want to vilify them. They say, don't bring them here because they're criminals, because they're pedophiles. We need to take a step back and look at the true face of homelessness. And many of the people who want to perpetuate that vitriol have never stepped into a homeless facility to see the true face of it.
Mr. Borough President, if they gave me a 2-hour show, it still wouldn't be enough time.
It never is.
It never is, but we got a lot today done, and we certainly hope you'll come back.
Thank you for the opportunity.
It's always great to have the Borough President of the Bronx, and if you do have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org. You put them on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. We ask you to like the Bronx Talk Facebook page, as the Borough President did, and you can check out our archives at bronxnet.org. You'll find Bronx Talk in the lower right navigation bar. Thanks to our producer, who's Jayla Juberis, and also to Director Shirley Arrieta, to who else is here, Nialani and Helen, and the cast of thousands. We'll see you next week. Good night.
Hello, good people of the Bronx and beyond. Welcome to A Life in Art.